All right. So I'm Dave Crossland, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the font editor projects I've been involved in. So I attended the very first Libre graphics meeting in 2006 in Lyon when I was an undergraduate student of graphic design. And I was very excited, when I came away from the event about the potential of Libre graphics and what I hoped would happen over the next 10 years. And some of those things have happened, and some of them haven't. When I thought about when I graduated, I expected to work as a graphic designer and to use Libre graphics tools. And so I was very happy, with Pathum's presentation yesterday, where he's in a very similar position that I was in Sri Lanka, looking to make that same kind of switch, as he passes out of college. So I worked for a year as a Unix systems administrator, and then I attended the University of Reading typeface design program, which is a one-year MA, and I developed Cantorell, and this was picked up as the GNOME 3 desktop typeface, although there was certainly some criticism about it, because of course I did it in a relatively short period of time, and I had some of the world's best teaching environment, learning environment, to produce it in, but it was made quite quickly and had some issues. And part of the reason that it had those issues was that I developed it using FontForge. And this is what FontForge looked like when I was attending the University of Reading. And I used, GNU plus Linux. I was in, I think, Ubuntu, and it worked. So I could do Cantorell, and many of the problems with Cantorell are really about me as a designer, not really know what I'm doing, rather than about the tool. But nevertheless, the tool could have been improved. And so after I graduated, or when I was studying, I was involved in trying to improve FontForge a little bit. And so you can see here that this is a photo of someone at a workshop that I did before I really started trying to improve FontForge, where the icons you can see are kind of the same as they'd always been. Tom Lechner, who just presented earlier, worked with me on improving the layers palette. And this is kind of a very classical font editor where you work on one glyph drawing at a time, and you can use the metrics window to see glyphs in the context of other glyphs. So I was involved not as a designer, but as a kind of project manager, commissioning various Libre fonts for the web by the Google Fonts project. And a couple of years ago, I was contacted by some designers in Edmonton when I was in Edmonton, and they were very interested to learn type design, and they were frustrated that there was no local resources for them to learn type design. And so in a kind of partnership with them, we organized the first crafting type workshop, which was a 5-day marathon beginner's introductory workshop. And I expected maybe 5 people would turn up. So it was a 5-day event. We sold tickets for $1,000 each, and we had about 40 people sign up. People flew in. We had designers working at Twitter fly in from San Francisco. And so I was very surprised about this, because my plan was to give the people at the workshop a copy of VirtualBox and a GNU plus Linux image with FontForge pre-installed to use FontForge. And so as this became a kind of a bigger event, then I brought in some other instructors, Evan Sorkin, who presented earlier today, Octavio Pardo, to kind of assist me with such a large class. And so, we shared the revenue from the event, and for my cut of the revenue, I didn't take it myself, and I worked with some developers to start improving FontForge. And to improve FontForge based on the feedback from these real users, the graphic designers who wanted to learn type design. So the first problem that they had was that this VirtualBox thing was a bit crazy, and they wanted it packaged for mostly the Mac OS X. So we have that done. So you can now run FontForge. You can install FontForge and run it very easily as a regular kind of Mac app, more or less. And the documentation, the website had the people were quite confused about that. So we worked on the website, and we organized, or Nate organized a FontForge documentation sprint, which was supported by the Google Open Source Projects Office. And again, Evan was one of the authors there. And so after kind of dealing with some of these low-hanging fruit, then I wanted to start adding new, useful features to FontForge. And so this idea of real-time collaboration, of working on type collaboratively, seems to be a very strong idea in the kind of free software community, and applying that to type design is interesting for lots of people. So I worked with Dr. Ben Martin and presented this work at the Libre Graphics meeting a few years ago. And we subsequently added the ability to edit glyphs kind of more directly in context, so that rather than having the metrics window to see this, you could click in the glyphs areas to see them and edit them, switching between glyphs very quickly. And generally at the crafting type workshops, maybe kind of 10% of the people are running Windows, and they wanted a Windows package. So we worked on that. Although Jeremy Tan has been one of the people in the FontForge community who's now maintaining the Windows port. And this is quite popular. So in the moving the project to GitHub, when we make releases on GitHub, we post the packages there, and GitHub provides a download count, which we show on the homepage. And so the last release, which was made at the end of March, 30 days ago, according to GitHub, has been downloaded something like 20,000 times, which sounds like a lot to me. However, we don't really see so much engagement on the GitHub issue tracker. So I'm very happy to say that today Frank Trampe, who's in the audience, has cut the new release for April, and so we'll be releasing new Mac and Windows packages in the next few days. And so that was kind of the work that we've done on FontForge. In doing some of this work, I became a little bit kind of disheartened, because it often took a long time to do things which ought not to take a long time. For example, in this feature, you can see that you can input the text at a input bar at the top of the window. And when this was initially implemented, the widget was a fraction of the width of the window. And since you often want to type in a lot of glyphs and pick between them, then I wanted the input to be as it is now, to be the width of the entire window. And making that change took the developer several hours. And to me, that's something which you should be able to change in a few minutes. So I feel that this is a very important and fundamental idea, that when we have software freedom, when the legal situation around the licensing of a piece of software gives the users and the developers equality in the political control of what features are added and what problems are fixed and when and by who. That is a kind of a legal and abstract freedom, and that is the base. That's necessary, but it's not really sufficient for software freedom to be real, to be tangible. And so my experience was that as someone very dedicated to trying to improve the software freedom movement's advances in typography software, then I was able to raise funds because I was already dedicating myself to do that and pay contractors to do it. And we've been able to make some advances this way. But for software freedom to be really tangible, then I felt that the users and the developers need to be, on a practical sense, more engaged and working together, rather than the users still being quite helpless, not legally, not politically, but technically, and that they say, well, change this, it should be wider, or this dialogue doesn't really make sense the way it's laid out. We don't want to change any functionality. We just want to change the interaction design. And it's very frustrating to do that with FontForge, certainly. And I think generally, this is more the case more widely with a lot of Libre graphics software. So while I was been contributing to FontForge, other people had kind of come into this idea of working on a font editor that they had freedom with. And so they developed web-based font editors. And so one of these was Typism, which is a kind of SVG-based font editor, where you could adjust the points directly in the browser. There was FontClod, which Eric presented a fork of earlier, which he'd made collaborative in a real-time sense, which doesn't crash when you take it to a workshop. And in East Asia, there had been several attempts to use the wiki software and combine that with web-based font editing features. Since Chinese, Japanese, and Korean fonts have tens of thousands of glyphs, then potentially a wiki approach could work to collaboratively producing freely licensed CJK fonts. And one of these editors, which I was especially fascinated with, was Metaflop. And Metaflop is a web interface to Metafont fonts. And so this allows someone who has no experience or skill with coding and programming to play with the parameters in a Metafont. So by changing the pen width, then the font becomes lighter, and you can deal with the typefaces parameters at a kind of global level. And so I happened to be in New York at the same time as one of the people involved in the project, Simon Egley, who presented Metaplator last year. So he'd been involved creating some prototypes and experiments with this, and he presented the results he had so far at last year's Libre Graphics meeting. And so Lars Pfister, who's presented last year and is here today, had been working on UFO.js, which was a software library to make it easier to build web-based font editors using the UFO font interchange format. And then also Peter Sicking, who presented some about the design process of Metaplator yesterday, was also at the Libre Graphics meeting last year. And so in discussing this with people in the Libre Graphics community, we kind of engaged in a kind of what's been a year-long project to develop a new kind of font editor. And while we were engaged in that process, a few other interesting things happened. So a guy who was based up in Seattle had been working for several years privately while he worked at Microsoft on a web-based font editor. And he decided to release it as a Libre software. And so this is has quite a lot of features because he'd been working on it for so long by himself. And so, as with the other editors, this allows you to go in and edit fonts. And the interface is quite, kind of peculiar, but it kind of has, the features that you would need to start to learn the basics of type design just by visiting the web app page and playing around. And then just after the Libre Graphics meeting last year, there was a Kickstarter launched for Prototypo by a pair of designers and developers in France. And they managed to raise a quite significant amount of money to also develop a parametric font editor. And the basic technology that their first prototype used was Angular.js and SVG. and using the power of AngularJS's functionality to make parametric SVG glyphs. So I met the designers of this project and discussed with them some of the ideas that we've been working on for Interpolator. And we had considered, working together and joining the projects, but in the end, we decided to, work in parallel on 2 different projects which have some similarities, but they have different users in mind. And so, as Peter was discussing yesterday, the Prototypo was really designed for prototyping and playing around with typography. And Peter's designed a Interpolator application for creative professionals. And so, because the users are different, even though the underlying technology is quite similar, the whole projects end up going in different directions. And then some of you who were at the Libre graphics meeting in 2007 in Poland may remember Haucom William-Lee's presentation about web fonts. And he published this article, CSS at 10 years, the next big thing, promoting the idea that web fonts could take off. And indeed they have. So this year, there was an interesting article also published on Listapart about live font interpolation on the web. And this laid out the case for how font interpolation is used by font designers to develop families of fonts. And that if this could be done live on the web, then it would provide latency benefits, that web pages would load faster, and that typographers, that users of fonts, would gain new, richer possibilities for their work. And this was followed up on the Listapart blog with a more technical analysis of the kinds of latency gains that could come from such technology. So I was very happy to see this kind of wider thinking in the type design community about how parametric fonts and font families could really be widely useful. And so as part of those articles, they published this simple demonstration where you can drag a slider between 2 masters and see the difference for that one letter. And this is a relatively simple prototype, simply to demonstrate the idea. And that many people became quite excited about this in the Listapart audience. Even though the technology behind this is very simple. It's simply an SVG with a slider and a little JavaScript to allow you to interpolate the 2. So over the course of the last year, Peter worked on the Interpolator wiki and proposed a very comprehensive design for what a Interpolator application could be. And we worked on the Google Plus community, discussing our work. And we ended up with some tools which people who've been involved in the project could use to create typefaces. And so today we've launched the new Interpolator homepage, which lays out the product vision. It shows demonstrations of some of the underlying kind of concepts that are in the system, and it shows some examples and describes this project history. And then kindly as a demo link. So we have the kind of 2 versions of the Interpolator technology available as demos. So the first one is the technology demo, which we call the red pill, and it shows the underlying technology, but it's not really a user interface that's useful in itself. It has to be used in combination with the underlying technology tools. And so you can see here on the left that you have some text files, and you can see that the base file is has the original point data that was drawn by an Indian type design foundry. And you can see that this follows the kind of syntax and structure of CSS, where you have a selector and then properties and values. And so LASA has developed this CPS, which instead of cascading style sheets, is cascading properties sheets. And so we take a font in the UFO format, and we import it into this CPS data structure. And then this, the CPS engine allows us to build up abstractions on that data in order to create a parametric system. And so we can see that if we select, for example, the extra wide bold CPS, and we can see that this is being rendered on the screen in the middle of the second row. We can change the width factor, and it becomes very wide, kind of freakishly wide. Or we can make more subtle adjustments. And you can see it redrawing there. So this is kind of part of LASA's technical dream, to see the ability to describe font features using a kind of familiar syntax to today's typographers, to web designers. And so LASA had built this technology, and then at the concurrently, Peter had been working with the other designers in the project on a user interface, which you can see here. And so it was a bit like building a bridge and not knowing if the two ends were going to meet in the middle. But we were able to make the bridge connect. And so I'm very happy to say that I'm going to show you a demonstration of the Interpolator application that's working with the real technology. And so the user interface has 3 pages, which are presented in a kind of scrolling horizontal form. And the first page is where you build up your font masters. So we can see the demo starts with a preloaded master, which is developed by Simon Egley, as was called in development Sean Sands, and was the work in progress was presented last year. And the project's final release release name is Canola. So you can see this master has been has loaded here, and so we can make a duplicate of that master. And then on the left, we can see some of the parameters that have been implemented so far. So we can start to increase the weight of the stroke. And we can also adjust the width to make the master wider. And we can increase the height of the glyphs. And we can increase the interletter spacing. And we can also do this not just at a global level, but also by selecting specific glyphs. So we can, example, select the O and the A, and then we can say that their width should be, maybe a little bit thinner. Or maybe it should be even wider. And so this demonstrates the cascading nature of the cascading property sheets, that you can make changes, and like CSS, those changes are resolved in a cascading manner. So having made a couple of masters, then you can move to the design spaces page. And then you have a design space area which you can drag your masters into. And this gives you a sort of interpolation space in which you can mix intermediate versions of the masters that you've created. So, for example, we can make something which is exactly like the regular master. And then we can add a new instance, which is halfway between the two. And the design of the Interpolation application is to have many more masters than designers are typically used to. And the idea is to keep the ability to design parametric type systems without writing any code. So having set out those instances, you can then move to the fonts page and export your instances. And so the Interpolator tool at the moment works entirely with the import and export of UFO fonts. So see how engaging this is, we're running a Teespring campaign to offer T-shirts to find people who are interested to support the development. So if you're interested in the Interpolator project, then I invite you to buy a T-shirt for $20 plus postage, and to kind of start participating in our project. So this kind of brings us back to the story of FontForge. What is the future of FontForge here? Well, one of the big features that we added to FontForge in the last 12 months, mainly by Crampade, was the full support for the unified font object format, which means that when you want to draw a font, you can do so with FontForge. You can import that into Interpolator. You can generate a family of styles. You can get the UFOs back out of Interpolator and load them back into your font editor to do the final design and production. So for FontForge, for me, I feel like I've titled this talk "Goodbye FontForge" because it seems that when people come to free software typography, they want a good editor that they can participate in the development of. And often people get so frustrated with FontForge that they leave and start their own project. And so having been through that process myself now, then I feel like there's a distinction between conservation and restoration when dealing with older buildings that seems appropriate to FontForge. That rather than trying to restore FontForge to a modern contemporary editor, it will be better to conserve FontForge as it is, and perhaps to work on making FontForge a little prettier, to work on making the dialogues more inviting for designers, to work on restyling the toolbar, so that simply changing the PNGs that are used for the functions can improve the usability and people's pleasure in using the software. But this isn't really going to fundamentally improve the overall project. So that's my experiences trying to develop free tools for doing free typography, and I think that with these projects like Libre Studio, Interpolator, that it's going to be more and more easy for typographers to become involved in type design. And I'd really, my kind of ambition for Interpolator is to start to really bridge that gap on a technical level. So there's an unrelated project called type.js, which is done by an individual who works at the Monotype Corporation. And it provides some more typographic sophistication using the CSS syntax. And so on this page, you can see that the paragraph breaking is a little more sophisticated, and that this is being done with a CSS style sheet and a JavaScript CSS processor that translates that into real CSS and page data. And so my kind of vision for Interpolator is that by reducing this barrier between typographers and type designers, that we can see more people involved in typography and type design using free software. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Patrick.
Yeah. Well, I didn't see FontForge though, but it needs update. So I was thinking, why don't you figure out how long it will take, and how many programmers it will take, and how much money it will take, and then crowdsource it. to bring it up to date?
I think that it would be so much effort to bring FontForge up to date, and it would still create this kind of class system where you have people who are technically able to participate in the development, and the users who are designers who have some technical skills to participate in the development of web-based programs, and they wouldn't be able to participate in the co-creation of FontForge itself. So I'd be very happy if someone else does that, but I am not going to. Because I think that the reason that we're here is that we want a proactive, free culture of graphics and typography. And I don't think that using traditional desktop software is the ideal way to create that kind of participatory culture.
It is still free desktop software, right?
It is. I'm not saying that it's non-free. I'm saying that the ideal cultural impact of software freedom is this co-creation. And I think that web-based software is effective for doing that.
Okay, I believe that we have to change the educational system and actually turn programming into part of mathematics. People have that as a core understanding of dealing with computers and logic and dealing with the world. You will not magically get that random other people contributing to the functionality such things for moving to the web. It is just like moving like the pool of potential contributors is just like moving hard.
So I don't think that that the specialization in industrial society is going to change, right? What you're calling for is for more people to be more generalist rather than to have industrial societies specialization.
Well, that's that point of view when you take the school critics stance. Yes. Well, this answer is, I'm saying that the application proposal is going to be a solution. It's just like removing the opportunity for people to read themselves. And I don't think anyone here wants to do that change in the school system. It's a bit tedious work.
So my example was that to change the width of an input box took somebody 3 hours when it should take 5 minutes.
I don't know for 1 hour.
So this is kind of what I mean, that having mastered software development, then you can work on the real functionality of programs. And generally, designers, typographers, type designers don't want to make the effort to try and master software development. But part of their professional practice is that they have to master web development. It's a much lower bar. And so they can be involved in the CSS level technology. They can be involved in maybe some very simple JavaScript adjustments.
And sometimes you make technological choices which are kind of like, what the fuck? Just because you want to be on the back. And just because you want to be, more people can contribute.
So I'm not saying it's perfect. So if you were
in a sense, it's kind of complicated. If you have something that works, it's like, oh, it's too difficult to contribute. Let's make some simple pointings instead.
So I'm not saying that the web stack applications are perfect and are
they're not easy
better.
to contribute to. Some parts of them, yes, but then there is pointings and functionality which will bill you 40 hours for instead of 4.
Okay. So I take the point. I'm very happy for other people to be more proactive in developing FontForge and desktop-based Libre graphics programs.
Well, I'm saying
but my focus.
Education and not development.
Okay. All right. Okay.
It's not the same way. Like, obviously, there's a lot of good functions that right now. So, like, eventually, you're gonna have to all the functionalities. I think eventually just to wind up rebuilding another version of
So Metapolator is not a general purpose font editor. Glyph Studio is. So you're right that the Glyph Studio project is got a lot of features missing when compared to FontForge. But I feel that I am more motivated to participate in the Glyph project and the FontForge project today.
So we now have two tools for different kinds of fonts that I want to make up and
Here, like the FontForge stuff, that's stuff that it offers. No other web tool offers the fonts. But FontForge can work with all methods, which is kind of similar to what Metapolator does. If you know what you're doing on the method, right? So,
multiple messages. I'm also suspicious about that.
why?
As you go along the weight scale, there's certain points where design changes kind of kick in. So eventually you have like add more asterisks to like curves that
Yeah, so Metapolator, I invite you to, if you're interested in the details, to look at the website, to chat to us, on the community channels, because it isn't a metafont-based system. It uses some metafont technologies like the hobby spline, and the current demo doesn't include features for doing the kind of design switches that you've described, but it's part of Peter's design that the application would support that kind of thing. One of the editors which I didn't mention that's been developed in parallel to FontForge is Bird Font, which is another free Libre licensed font editor. It's written in Vala, uses GTK, and I'm not saying to stop contributing to GIMP and Scribus and so on. I'm simply presenting my experience of trying to develop these applications further. So we're out of time. I think today's been.
We are on time. We have a party in an hour. It takes half an hour to
So we better get into the party. If you want to fight with me afterwards, I'll be outside.
I'm going to fight. So another round of applause for
And for what it's worth, I will be part of free for next year.
So I'll just tell people how to get to the party as well. The party is at Interaccess, which is at 9 Avenue, which is at the intersection of Hopkinton and Queen. And one possible way of getting